We're never going to talk. We're never going to talk to Mau Mau. And then the head of Mau Mau goes to visit the Queen at Buckingham Palace and has a cup of tea. So we will talk to the insurgents. Your government will, in some form or another. But the question is when, and what happens in Iran before you do? Ask Cy Hirsch. He's one of the very few great American journalists you have left who is doing his job.
We have about 5 minutes left, and there's an unfortunate group of people who had their cards handed to you because you didn't have a chance to read them. I've rejected ones I can't actually read or we've answered. And I'm glad it's not my handwriting I'm trying to read because I wouldn't be able to do that at all. Well, here's a question. We'll get to it. Is there one there you want to?
Yeah, it's a good one. Mr. Fisk, it's fair to say that you are preaching to the converted. Absolutely correct, whoever wrote this in pencil. How do we amplify these ideas beyond Town Hall, New York City? Well, I mentioned earlier, Amtrak crews, truck drivers, security men at airports, Homeland Security. I talk all over the United States, not just in universities, and I talk everywhere, Denver, St. Louis, Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I thought at Cedar Rapids, Iowa, by the way, there were mountains and snow and waterfalls. Of course, those of you who've been unfortunate have gone there. I've seen flat, wet beet fields and railroad yards. But I talk at all these places, and I have to be honest and say that, in many of them, I guess 20% of the audience is academic, and the rest are ordinary folk from the town and people who read newspapers on the internet. My hated internet, of course. It does get you to read The Guardian and even The Independent. And most of them have a pretty shrewd idea what's going on. I don't think most Americans are at all stupid. I think, as I said before, you have a very shrewd idea what's going on in the Middle East. The problem here is your inability, it's not your fault, or unwillingness, which I understand, to actually speak it. It's there. It's no difficulty if you want to know about the Middle East. You can bloody well fly there on an airplane, have a look at it. It's not difficult. Yes, this is the converted to some extent, not totally, I hope. But when I go outside New York, well, not just on the East Coast, when I go to Houston, even the wrong side of the tracks, I'm talking to people who want to know. Sure, I get, oddly enough, California, I tend to get the Christian fundamentalists outside shouting abuse. There was once a Fox News turned up to take film of them, and I scuttered round to the back and cursed Robert Fisk with them, and I actually appeared on Fox News. And I think it once happened with the Orange County Register, one of my favourite newspapers in California. It's a quite a good paper, by the way. I'm not knocking the Orange County Register. There you go. That's the answer to that question. I don't think Americans are stupid. I think you're pretty smart, and I think you know what's going on. It's the difficulty is getting that voice out and telling the truth.
One of the things you said before was that the Lannan Lifetime Achievement Award provides you with a kind of a flak jacket. What are the flak jackets out there for journalists in the Middle East, from the Middle East, trying to do work?
They have none. And we use them. We pay them in Iraq. Well, we don't, but American papers pay Iraqis to go out and take the risks on the street and come back with the information. And it goes in a story, and at the end of it, it says, this story was written with the help of Ahmed Mohammed so-and-so, which means that he did the legwork. They have no protection at all. I mean, we have a driver. He has no protection. But I don't. We have no bodyguards and no weapons. The last time I went to the New York Times office in Baghdad, it was a vast fortress with watchtowers and Iraqis holding Kalashnikov rifles in New York Times T-shirts. I'm not kidding. But the Iraqis have become our foot soldiers, Western journalists, foot soldiers in Iraq, and we don't pay enough attention to them. And interestingly, I noticed we don't usually write about them. Even anonymously, we could, but we don't, because that's part of hotel journalism. That's part of the part we put underneath here. No, in Lebanon too, Samir Kassir, whom I knew, I saw his body lying in the car after he was blown up. By the Syrians, perhaps. No, none.
There's a question for you about all the bodies that you've seen. How does a man who has been and seen wars for over 30 years maintain sanity while soldiers often experience complete mental breakdown after only a single war?
You've got to be tough to work in the Middle East, and you're not sent there to cry or weep. You're sent there to get the story. If we don't, I don't like these questions one sometimes gets asked, not tonight I don't think, but how do you cope? Do you need counselling? Are you stressed? Well, I'm sorry, the people who need help are the people who live in the countries whose families are being torn apart by the wars that we cover. If journalists don't want to cover wars, they can fly home business class with a glass of champagne. These people have passports which are pariah passports. They can't leave, and they sit there trying to protect their wives or their husbands or their sons or their daughters or their grandparents. And they live in situations of immense fraught danger, and they go out of their minds. They do. I see people who are psychiatrically, psychologically, whatever you like, totally broken people. I don't think they'll ever recover. But don't worry about the journalists. I mean, we are dying in larger and more numbers. I care about that, yes. I care about it from my point of view and because I've had friends killed, including in Iraq. But if you want to talk about the people who are suffering, they're the people of Iraq, not the journalists.
Thank you. Final question, pulling on some of these cards, comes back to us. There's a wonderful series of interviews you do with arms manufacturers and arms sellers around the world that appears in the book, The Great War for Civilization. And one of them, trying to squirm off the hook that you've got him on, says it's not just we the sellers, it's you the taxpayers who are paying for this death, who are paying for this destruction, for this killing. You've talked a little bit about the challenges that we face talking, but I don't have a lot of sympathy for us with our challenges either. What do you think we can do, should do, could do, must do to deal with our responsibilities?
I'm not going to be a cheerleader for you activists as you interact. But look, I'll put my neck out because I write about this in this book, and I do a lot of writing about arms manufacturers, particularly US arms, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, you know them all. In the Great War for Civilization, I actually trace the manufacturers of missile, which was fired into a vehicle behind me, into an ambulance by the Israelis. It was an AGM-114C made by Boeing at Duluth in Georgia. I went back to the scene, and we actually got from the corpses of the children and women who were killed inside bits of the missile coding and scattered around, and we found the exact place of manufacture and the date. And I went to Duluth, Georgia, and asked the management and the developer of the missile to meet me to talk to me about this missile. They thought they were going to have a great advertisement, this wonderful missile that the Independent was going to be advertising. And then I laid the pieces of missile down the table, along with pictures of the dead children and the wounded, and say, do you take responsibility for this? And there was a bigger bang in the Duluth office than there was on the road. Actually, it turned out that they had not sold it to the Israelis, which I thought. It had been made for the US Marines, taken to Saudi Arabia in 1990, used against the Iraqis in Kuwait, and the leftovers were dropped off at the Haifa munitions pier in Israel as a quid pro quo from the Americans to the Israelis for not joining in the 1990 war. And then it was fired at an ambulance in southern Lebanon, and then Fisk got it in his claws and took it to Duluth. Big, long... But I ask in my book, and I've asked many times in articles, why don't those who suffer and are wounded by US missiles take the US, why don't they take the US missile manufacturers to court? Good attorneys, good law courts, good laws which you have, should allow those people who suffer at the hands of your arms manufacturers get redress. But for some reason, I've never seen a single case. I'm not advocating it. I'm asking the question why it doesn't happen.
Can we turn history? Can we take a shift? You describe all the moments at which the United States could have done differently throughout the 20th century. Do we still have a moment like that ahead of us? And that's the last question.
I have a recording of Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1936. You'll forgive my attempt at an upstate New York accent. And he says, American boys will never fight in a European war. Well, there was certainly a corner turned after that, wasn't there? I think that circumstances change the corners, not people. What is the driving force of circumstances in United States politics at the moment? It's the Iraqi insurgents, isn't it? The Iraqis are deciding your history at the moment. Not Bush, not Hillary, not Obama. It's the state of war in the Middle East that is deciding your history. And I rather fear, because it shows that humans don't have the power that we should have if we acted justly, that it is circumstances and history which will decide those corners, not us. I'm sorry that's such a pessimistic reply.
Maybe not. Robert
I fear
Fisk.
so.
The Great War for Civilization.
Robert Fisk is Middle East correspondent for The Independent. To read his latest work, visit independent.co.uk.